My name is Walter Mason. I'm 74 years old, retired, and living alone in a modest two-bedroom home in the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio. I taught high school biology for 38 years before a minor stroke forced me into early retirement. The school sent me off with a plaque, a coffee mug with the mascot, and a standing ovation in the cafeteria that made me feel more like I was being buried than celebrated. That was almost a decade ago. Since then, life has narrowed to a kind of careful ritual. I wake early, not because I want to, but because my body has its own clock now. I make oatmeal, read the paper in silence, and take my morning pills. A pale blue beta blocker, a yellow statin, and the most important one. My heart medicine, prescribed after my stroke. Something called Coradrex. Without it, I'd be rolling the dice every day. It's a powerful vasodilator. I don't pretend to understand the chemistry, but I know what happens when I miss a dose. Dizziness, blurred vision, a pain that feels like someone driving a nail into my chest. The kind of pain that reminds you your body is temporary. I never miss a dose, not intentionally. My wife Caroline passed 5 years ago. Cancer. She was diagnosed late and gone in 6 months. There's not much to say about it that doesn't sound like every other widower's story. We were married 42 years. She was the only woman I ever really knew, and she made the house a home, filled it with plants, light, laughter, and a particular scent of vanilla and cinnamon that still clings to some of her sweaters in the closet I can't bring myself to empty. Since she died, the house has changed. It's quieter now. Not the kind of quiet you cherish, but the kind that amplifies every creak of the floorboards and hum of the refrigerator. For the first couple of years after Caroline's passing, I spoke to her photo every night before bed, like a fool, asking her how her day was. I told myself I'd stop once I felt less alone. I never did. My daughter Jessica moved back in with me 18 months ago. She's 37, recently divorced, and came back with boxes of clothes, 2 large mirrors, and a vague promise that she was just staying until things settled down. I didn't ask for specifics. I was just glad for the company. She sleeps in her old room, the one with the faded posters of boy bands and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. At first, it felt like a blessing. She helped around the house, cooked sometimes, made me laugh. But little things began to shift. She started coming home late, sometimes smelling like vodka, sometimes with people I didn't recognize. Young men with hoodies and tattoos who never said hello and called her Jay. She said she was working on something new, some wellness startup, which sounded suspicious from the start. I didn't press. I wanted to believe she was trying to rebuild her life. And who was I to get in the way? Jessica's always been charismatic. Even as a child, she had a way of bending adults to her will. I used to joke that she could talk a cat into swimming. She was sharp in school, stubborn as hell, and always just a little too clever for her own good. Caroline and I clashed over how to raise her. I was firm, wanted structure and rules. Caroline was softer, always reminding me that the world would give Jessica enough hard lessons on its own. In the end, maybe Caroline was right. Maybe I should have been less of a disciplinarian and more of a father. When Jessica got pregnant at 22 and married a man neither of us liked, I thought, this is where the bottom drops out. But she surprised us, held it together for over a decade before it all unraveled. Now she's here. And I'm not sure if it's a second chance or just a slow-motion disaster I'm too old to stop. We have our routines. I pay the bills. She buys groceries, though sometimes I notice receipts from places we've never shopped before. Fancy organic stores, delivery apps with large totals. My retirement checks cover everything, barely. Between my pension, Social Security, and what little Caroline left behind, we get by. But there's not much buffer. Still, I never imagined I'd have to keep an eye on my daughter's spending habits. That felt like betrayal, even thinking it. When I had my stroke 8 years ago, the doctor told me that one of the small vessels in my brain had narrowed dangerously. He said I was lucky. A warning shot, he called it. The medication they prescribed after, the Coradrex, was part of a long-term strategy to keep everything flowing. Without it, the risks spike. And it's not just physical. The thought of not having it, of losing control, terrifies me more than death. Because death I can accept. But being helpless, being reduced to a burden, that's my real fear. That's the fear I carry in my bones every time I feel a twinge in my chest or forget what I was about to say. That's why I count the pills every Sunday night. I open the little plastic box with the days of the week on it, and I place each capsule carefully. I check, double-check, and put the rest of the bottle in the cabinet above the stove, behind the canned beans. It's a system. It's how I stay alive. I don't expect Jessica to understand. She's too young to know what it feels like to live on a schedule determined by your body's failures. She doesn't know what it's like to be afraid of sleep because you're not sure if your heart will keep beating through the night. She's never asked about the pills, never mentioned them. I assumed she knew they were important, even if she didn't know exactly what they did. But lately I've had this strange feeling. I can't explain it. A vague unease, like walking into a room and sensing that something's changed, but not being able to say what. My symptoms have been acting up more often. A few weeks ago, I had to sit down in the middle of mowing the lawn because my vision blurred, and the sweat poured off me like I was running a marathon. I chalked it up to the heat, but it wasn't that hot. Last Thursday, I found myself gasping after climbing the stairs. I haven't missed a dose, not knowingly. Yesterday, I opened the bottle and noticed the seal was torn slightly. Just a little, almost nothing. It was the kind of detail you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. But I was looking. I was looking because something in my body feels different, wrong. I'm no hypochondriac. But when your whole existence is measured out in milligrams, you pay attention. I poured a few capsules into my hand. They looked right, same shape, same color. But something in my gut told me, no. These are not my pills, not all of them. Something is off. Still, I didn't say anything to Jessica. What would I say? That I think someone tampered with my medicine? That I think my own daughter might be involved? I couldn't bring myself to ask. Not yet. Not until I was sure. Because if I'm right, if she really did what I think she did, then it's not just a mistake. It's a betrayal. I don't know if I can come back from. And if I'm wrong, if this is just old age making me paranoid, then I'll have accused my only child of something unforgivable. So I wait. I observe. I count the pills again. And deep inside, a part of me whispers what I don't want to believe. That the person living under my roof, the person I once carried in my arms, may be the one who's quietly stealing my life, one capsule at a time. It happened on a Monday morning, early October, just as the leaves began to bronze and the air turned that particular kind of cold that settles into your joints. I woke up dizzy, with a high-pitched ringing in my ears that wouldn't stop. At first, I assumed it was the weather, some fluctuation in pressure. That happens sometimes when you're older. But this wasn't that. My vision kept swimming in and out of focus as I shuffled into the kitchen. I poured a glass of water and took my morning dose of Coradrex. But even as I swallowed the capsule, a strange chill crept over me. My hands trembled. I couldn't feel the tip of my fingers properly. There was a numbness in my tongue, a heaviness behind my eyes. I sat down slowly, breathing through the sensation, telling myself it would pass. But it didn't. The rest of the day I moved like I was walking underwater. I forgot to turn off the burner after boiling eggs. I dropped the remote 3 times. At one point, I found myself standing in the hallway with no idea what I'd been about to do. I chalked it up to age again, but deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong. Very wrong. That evening, I skipped dinner. My appetite was gone. Jessica came home late, as usual, heels clacking on the linoleum, dropping her keys on the counter without so much as a hello. I asked if she could help me go through my medicine, that I thought something might be off. But she brushed it aside with a tired wave of her hand. "Dad, don't start. You're just overthinking again. Did you even eat anything today?" she said, without looking at me, already halfway into her room. I didn't press. I went to bed early, though I barely slept. My heart raced through the night like a distant drumbeat I couldn't quiet. The next morning, the dizziness was worse. I sat on the edge of the bed for nearly 10 minutes before I could stand. My joints screamed, and when I finally made it to the kitchen, I noticed something I'd missed before. The bottle of Coradrex was nearly empty. That shouldn't have been possible. I had filled the prescription just 10 days ago. It was supposed to last me a month, 30 pills. But there were barely a dozen left. I recounted them twice. 13 pills, which meant 17 were missing. That couldn't be explained by simple forgetfulness or misplacement. Either I was double dosing in my sleep, which was absurd, or someone had taken them. And the only other person with access to this house was Jessica. I stared at the label on the bottle, reading it over and over again, like the truth would reveal itself in the fine print. A sick feeling twisted in my gut. The seal had been peeled and re-glued. It was subtle, almost professionally done. I examined the cap under the kitchen light and saw what I hadn't dared look for the day before. Tiny scratch marks near the ridges, like someone had pried it open carefully, then forced it back into place. The capsules looked identical to the ones I remembered, but I couldn't ignore the voice in my head anymore. Something had been tampered with. Someone had been tampering with them. Later that day, I made an appointment with my doctor. I didn't tell him the whole truth, just that I was feeling faint, having memory lapses, and that I was worried the dosage of my medication wasn't working anymore. He ordered a blood panel and told me we'd know in a few days. "Your vitals are stable," he said, scribbling notes on a clipboard. "But you look pale. Have you been sleeping?" I said no, and he nodded with that kind of clinical concern doctors reserve for elderly patients they assume are on the decline. Before I left, I asked him what would happen if someone stopped taking Coradrex suddenly. He blinked. "They'd be at significant risk," he said. "Depending on the condition, it could lead to cardiac events." "Why do you ask?" I told him I was just curious. That evening, I sat in the living room pretending to watch television while Jessica took a phone call in the kitchen. She didn't know I could hear everything from my chair. She never did realize how sound traveled in this house. "I've got more," she whispered, "but it's not going to be free this time. This stuff's legit, pharmaceutical grade. It's not like that over-the-counter garbage you guys mess with." There was a pause, then laughter. "Of course I know what I'm doing. It's my dad's. He doesn't even notice." Another pause. "No, he's not going to say anything. He's old. Just gets confused sometimes. Thinks he's losing it. I refill it before he ever checks. Trust me." She hung up and walked past me without making eye contact, humming under her breath. I sat frozen, feeling something crack inside. Not just anger, not even betrayal. It was deeper than that. A sense of complete and total dislocation. I didn't recognize her voice. Not the words, not the tone, not the gleeful, remorseless confidence. That wasn't the daughter I raised. That was someone else, a stranger who wore her face. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen staring at the pill bottle, wondering how long this had been going on. Had she been doing this since she moved in? Had I been slowly poisoned by the one person I trusted? I thought of Caroline, of how she would have handled it. She would have confronted Jessica, demanded answers. But I wasn't her. I needed proof. The next day I went to the hardware store and bought a small security camera, the kind you can hide behind a book or plant. I told the clerk it was to keep an eye on raccoons digging in my trash. I installed it that afternoon behind a dusty copy of The Biology of Belief, one of the last textbooks I'd kept after retirement. I angled the lens toward the cabinet above the stove, the cabinet where I kept my medication. Then I waited. 2 days later, while I was pretending to rake leaves in the front yard, she did it. I saw her through the window. She moved quickly, expertly, opened the cabinet, pulled out the bottle, uncapped it, poured some capsules into her palm, then used a small Ziploc bag to transfer them. She replaced the bottle, resealed the cap, and left the kitchen. The whole operation took less than 30 seconds. I watched the footage that night, pausing and rewinding over and over. There was no doubt. It was her. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wasn't ready. The camera had audio, too. The next day, she was back on the phone. Yeah, same stuff. Coradrex. Some heart medication. Yeah, apparently it's like meditative or something. Slows everything down. People mix it with benzos or weed and just zone out. No, he's fine. Doesn't even notice. He's losing his mind anyway. It's like taking candy from a baby. No, you can't have all of it. I need to make it last till the refill. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just theft. It wasn't desperation. It was business. She was selling my medicine, selling it to kids who thought it was a chill high, a way to escape the pressure of their lives. Maybe she didn't think it was a big deal. Maybe she told herself I didn't really need all of it, that I could skip a few days here and there. Maybe she thought I wouldn't notice. But I had noticed. My body had noticed, and now I had proof. But what I didn't have was a plan. What do you do when your own child is slowly killing you for profit? What do you do when you can't trust the person who brings groceries into your house, who has a key to your front door, who laughs in your kitchen and says she loves you? I wanted to believe it was temporary, a phase, that she'd gotten in with the wrong people and was looking for a way out. But the truth was uglier. She wasn't trapped. She was in control. She liked the game. She liked being the one with access, and she was using me to play it. I sat in the dark that night, playing the audio over and over. It's like taking candy from a baby. Those were her exact words. And the baby was me. 3 days after I captured the footage of Jessica stealing my medication, I began to document everything. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet. Didn't know if I would take it to the police, to a lawyer, to some medical board. But I knew I had to protect myself, and that meant building a case. Each morning, I took photographs of the remaining pills. I started logging the dates and times when Jessica was out of the house versus when I noticed the levels were low. I kept the pill bottles in the same cabinet, but I now counted every capsule, inspecting them one by one before placing them in my weekly pill organizer. I even weighed the bottle on a digital kitchen scale, noting every decimal shift in grams. It felt ridiculous at times, obsessive even, but I'd reached the point where I didn't trust anything that passed through her hands. I cooked my own meals now, no matter how much my joints ached or how exhausted I felt, and I only drank from sealed containers. There was a new kind of tension in the house, like a cord pulled too tight. Jessica seemed agitated, more volatile. Her phone calls became louder, more frequent, and often ended with slamming doors or muttered curses. Once, I caught her kicking one of the kitchen cabinets, growling under her breath. Another time, I found a broken wine glass in the sink and a smear of blood on a paper towel in the trash. I didn't ask questions. I just added it to the ledger in my mind. The rising volatility, the pattern of unraveling. That Friday, she came home visibly high. Her pupils were blown wide, and her speech had that syrupy delay of someone fighting to keep their mouth in sync with their thoughts. She flopped onto the couch and laughed at the ceiling for no reason. I stood in the doorway, silent, watching her. When she noticed me, she grinned. "Don't look so serious, Dad," she said, drawing the syllables out as though they were made of warm caramel. "You're such a buzzkill." I asked her what she'd taken, and she waved a lazy hand in the air. "Nothing bad, just mellow stuff. Chill out. God, you're always in teacher mode. You need to learn how to let go." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her shoulders and shake her until something real came through her eyes. Something human. Something that resembled the daughter I remembered. But instead, I turned and walked back to my room, locked the door, and sat in the dark with my hands clenched so tight my knuckles cracked. That night, I dreamed of Caroline. In the dream, she stood in the kitchen, holding a single white capsule in her hand. She looked at me and said, "She doesn't know what she's doing." Then the lights flickered and everything turned to dust. I woke up gasping. The next morning, I called the pharmacy to ask about early refills. The woman on the line told me I'd already refilled my prescription just a week ago and wasn't eligible for another for at least 2 more weeks. I asked if anyone else had picked it up. She said no, it had been delivered, signed for by someone named Mason. My last name, no first initial. I hung up and stared at the floor for a long time. So she'd forged the delivery or intercepted the package. It was worse than I thought. She wasn't just stealing pills from my bottle. She was manipulating the entire supply chain. I went online and logged into the pharmacy account I hadn't touched in years. Sure enough, there were multiple delivery addresses listed. One of them was my own, but another was a P.O. box I didn't recognize. I called the pharmacy again, but they said they couldn't confirm anything without proper documentation or a police report. I felt the ground shifting beneath me. The systems I trusted, the safeguards I believed in, they were paper walls. Anyone with access and motivation could crawl through them. That Sunday, I pretended to go for a walk, but instead doubled back and stood outside the kitchen window where Jessica was on another call. She was pacing barefoot, the hem of her hoodie trailing behind her like a cape. "No, I told you, I have more coming on Thursday. The guy said it's strong stuff, like top tier. Yeah, it's the heart stuff again. Coradrex. It hits smoother than Oxy. People love it. It's not addictive, technically, but it slows you down real nice. Yeah, my old man doesn't even notice. He sleeps like a bear." I backed away before I could hear the rest. I didn't want to hear the rest. I didn't want to know what she was trading for, or who her clients were, or what kind of desperate, ruined people thought a vasodilator was a good time. All I knew was that she was selling my life in little increments, profiting off the decay of my body. And that realization sat inside me like a stone I couldn't pass. The escalation wasn't loud, not at first. It came quietly, through a series of humiliations. She started mocking my routines, questioning my memory, planting seeds of doubt. "Dad, you already told me that," she'd say when I asked if she'd picked up the mail. "You left the stove on again," she'd add, even when I was certain I hadn't cooked. "You're getting forgetful. Maybe you should write things down." I began to wonder if she was trying to make me question my own mind, to blur the line between reality and imagination, so that when I finally accused her of something, no one would believe me. Not even me. One evening I went to take my pills and found that the entire weekly organizer had been shifted. The capsules rearranged, some slots doubled up, others empty. I confronted her, finally, unable to contain it anymore. "Are you touching my medication?" I asked, standing in the hallway as she scrolled through her phone. She looked up, smirking. "What?" Number, why would I? Because the pills are missing. Because I'm getting sick. Her smile flattened. Maybe you're just old, Dad. Maybe you're finally falling apart. I stared at her, trying to read her face, but all I saw was a wall. Smooth, cold, impenetrable. She turned back to her phone. You should see a doctor. Get your head checked. The next day, I found a flyer on the kitchen table. It was for a senior memory care facility. Someone had circled the words Alzheimer's support in red ink. At first, I thought it was junk mail, but then I saw Jessica's handwriting on the side. Might be good to talk to someone, just in case. I crumpled it and threw it in the trash, my hands shaking. She was setting the stage, preparing for some kind of legal maneuver, perhaps. If she could convince someone that I was mentally compromised, she could gain control over my finances, my property, my medical decisions. She could drain me dry and call it caretaking. I sat at the kitchen table for over an hour, tracing the cracks in the wood grain with my finger, wondering how it had come to this. How had I become a man afraid in his own home? How had my daughter become a predator? A few nights later, I woke to the sound of the front door closing softly. I checked the clock, 2:43 a.m. I crept to the window and saw Jessica outside, handing something to a man in a hoodie. He gave her a wad of bills. She slipped the money into her sweatshirt and climbed into his car for a moment. 10 minutes passed before she returned. I didn't ask where she'd gone. I didn't want to hear another lie. I just added it to the growing list of evidence, the silent record I was building against her. And then it happened. The moment I had feared most. A full episode. 1 week later, in the middle of the day, I collapsed in the backyard while filling the bird feeder. 1 second I was upright, watching a cardinal flutter in the branches, and the next I was on the ground, gasping, vision tunneling. My chest seized, and I felt a pressure like an iron plate pressing down from the inside. I thought I was dying. I thought, this is it. This is the end. Jessica found me 20 minutes later, sprawled in the grass, barely conscious. She screamed, called 911, and to her credit, rode with me in the ambulance. But I remember how her hands shook as she clutched her phone, texting furiously, and I knew in that moment that her panic wasn't about me. It was about the fallout, about what I might say, about what might come out in the ER. At the hospital, they stabilized me quickly. I was lucky, they said. No permanent damage, but something had interfered with the effectiveness of my medication. The attending physician frowned as he read the toxicology report. Your bloodstream shows lower levels of Coradrex than we'd expect, given your prescription. Are you sure you're taking it consistently? I nodded. Every day. Never missed a dose. He looked at me, then back at the chart, and his brow furrowed deeper. Something's not adding up. I didn't tell him what I knew. Not yet. I needed time to think. I needed to know exactly what she was doing, how far it went, how deep the rot had spread. When we got back home 2 days later, Jessica was quieter, nicer. She brought me soup, asked how I was feeling, called me Dad again instead of you. But the sweetness was brittle, like sugar over a poison. That night, I found another bottle of Coradrex in her purse while she was in the shower. It had my name on it, but the seal was unbroken. A new prescription, untouched. I took a photo and put it back exactly where I found it. Now I knew. She wasn't even giving me the full refills. She was keeping the medicine for herself, for her friends, for whoever was paying. I was surviving on leftovers, half-doses, fakes. And the only reason I was still alive was because I was stubborn and suspicious and lucky. But I knew that wouldn't be enough next time. The next attack might not leave me with the strength to crawl back. The next betrayal might be final. So I made a decision. Not out of vengeance, not out of anger, but out of necessity. If she wouldn't stop, I would have to stop her, even if it meant losing the last person in this world I still called family. The call came just after midnight on a Wednesday. I was half asleep in my chair in the living room, the television flickering shadows across the ceiling, the blanket pulled up to my chest, though I hadn't felt warm in days. My first thought, as the phone rang, was that it had to be the hospital calling about some mistake in my chart, or maybe one of those robocalls telling me my car warranty had expired. I didn't expect the voice on the other end to be young, male, and frightened. "Is this Walter Mason?" he asked. I said yes. He hesitated. "I got your number from a prescription bottle. Look, I think your daughter sold me your meds. I didn't know it was real heart medication. I thought it was just for anxiety or whatever. And now my friend is in the ICU. She took too many, like 4 or 5 at once. I thought you should know. I'm sorry." Then he hung up. I sat there, stunned, the receiver pressed to my ear long after the dial tone had returned. I didn't move for what felt like minutes. It was as though everything in my body had gone slack. I wasn't surprised, not really. But there's a different kind of pain that comes when suspicion turns into confirmation. I had feared that Jessica was reckless, selfish, desperate. But now I knew she was dangerous. She wasn't just risking my life. She was gambling with the lives of strangers, kids barely old enough to understand what they were taking. Someone could have died. Someone still might. I should have called the police then. That would have been the sane, rational thing to do. But I didn't. I couldn't. I sat in the dark instead, listening to the refrigerator hum, the clock tick, the low creak of the house settling in the wind. I thought about Caroline again, how she would have known what to do, how she would have looked at Jessica and seen not just the behavior, but the cause beneath it. She would have asked the questions I hadn't dared ask. When did you start? Why did you do this? What are you trying to escape? But Caroline wasn't here. There was only me, an old man sitting in the ruins of a life that once had meaning, grasping at the edges of a daughter he no longer recognized. The next morning I found Jessica pacing the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, her voice low and urgent. "No, I don't know how they got it. Maybe I dropped it. It doesn't matter. Just delete the texts. If anyone asks, you didn't get it from me. Got it? Don't mention my name." She saw me and paused. "I gotta go." Then, without missing a beat, she turned to me with a forced smile. "Morning, Dad. Want some coffee?" I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. She poured it, hand steady, eyes unreadable. The mask was back on. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. A man in plain clothes stood there, badge barely visible on his belt. "Detective Ramos," he said. "We're conducting a routine follow-up about a young woman hospitalized last night after ingesting a dangerous combination of prescription drugs. May I ask if anyone in this household has recently filled a prescription for Coradrex?" I looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Yes." "That's mine." He nodded, made a note. "Has anyone else had access to your medication, Mr. Mason?" I hesitated. Behind me, I could feel Jessica's presence in the hallway, frozen, silent. I could hear the faint sound of her breath. "No," I said finally. "Just me." He gave me a card. "If you remember anything, or if anything comes up, you can call me. We're not looking to charge anyone unjustly, just trying to prevent this from happening again." I nodded and closed the door. Jessica appeared a moment later, eyes wide, voice shaking. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing," I said. "I didn't tell him anything." She stared at me, trying to decide if I was lying. I could see the panic rising, her mind scrambling to guess how much I knew. She didn't ask why the police were here. She didn't need to. That night, I watched the footage again. Jessica opening the cabinet, Jessica pocketing the pills, Jessica laughing on the phone about how easy it all was. I transferred the files to a USB drive and hid it in an old coffee can in the garage. I wasn't ready to use it yet, but I needed to know it was safe. Insurance, leverage. I didn't sleep. My heart fluttered irregularly, and I sat up in bed gasping for air. I thought about going to the hospital, but I was too afraid to leave the house unattended. I didn't know what she might do if she realized how much I knew. Instead, I took a half dose, one of the few pills I trusted, and waited for the world to stop spinning. The turning point came the following morning when I overheard her on the phone again, this time with someone she owed money to. "I told you, I'll have it by Friday. No, he doesn't suspect anything. He just had a little episode, but he's fine. I'm watching him, okay? I'm taking care of it." The way she said it chilled me, like I was a chore, a liability, something to be managed. Not a father, not a person. I stepped outside onto the porch, needing air, needing space. My legs buckled halfway down the stairs, and I had to grab the railing to keep from falling. I stood there for a long time, watching the neighbor's dog chase a squirrel across the yard. And I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't pretend it was going to fix itself. I couldn't tell myself that love was enough. Love had nothing to do with this. This was survival. I called my attorney that afternoon, told him I needed to update my will, revoke any powers of attorney Jessica might have access to, and secure my medical records. He asked if everything was okay. I said yes, which was a lie, but a convenient one. He set up an appointment. That evening, Jessica noticed the manila envelope on the counter with the legal firm's return address. She didn't say anything, but I saw the way her eyes narrowed, the way her jaw tightened. She knew something had shifted. A power she thought she held was slipping. I waited for the confrontation, but it didn't come. Not directly. Instead, she began acting affectionate again. Cooked me dinner. Sat beside me on the couch. Called me Daddy. It would have been touching if it hadn't been so obviously strategic. I went along with it, saying little, offering neutral smiles, all while keeping my guard up. I didn't believe in redemption anymore. I believed in caution. That week, I received a call from the hospital about the girl who'd overdosed. She had survived barely. Her parents were filing a report. I asked if they needed anything from me, but they said no. Someone else had already given them a name, a source, Jessica's. That was the final straw. I printed the still frames from the camera footage. I wrote a brief summary of what had been happening. I placed it all in an envelope marked "in case of emergency" and left it with my lawyer. I told him if anything happened to me, if I died unexpectedly or ended up in a hospital again, he should open it and take the necessary steps. He agreed, his face grim. "Do you want to press charges now?" he asked. I shook my head. Not yet, because part of me still hoped, still clung to some fraying thread of the girl I remembered, the one who used to curl up on my lap and ask me to read Goodnight Moon in my tired old voice. But that thread was breaking. And when it finally snapped, I knew there would be no going back. It didn't take long for the silence between Jessica and me to rot into something bitter, something too heavy to ignore, yet too dangerous to name aloud. She sensed it, the distance, the quiet resolve that had replaced my confusion, and she began to watch me more closely, lingering in the doorway when I took my medicine, asking casual questions about when my next doctor's appointment was, whether I'd been forgetting things lately, whether I still remembered how to pay the electric bill online. She framed it all with a smile, feigned concern dripping from every syllable like syrup over poisoned bread. But I saw it for what it was. Surveillance, preparation, groundwork, for a case she was quietly building behind my back. The shift wasn't dramatic, not yet, but the clues were there, tiny cracks in the foundation of normal life. She moved my pill organizer once, claiming she was just tidying the counter. She offered to help manage my prescriptions online. Said, "You know how these sites are. They're not really built for your generation." I declined, politely at first, but as the questions grew more pointed, the offers more insistent, I started locking my medication in a drawer in my bedroom, a drawer she didn't know I had reinforced with a simple metal hasp and a padlock from the garage. She never asked why I was suddenly carrying the keys in my bathrobe pocket, but she noticed. I could see it in the sideways glances, in the way her lips tightened when she passed my door. Then came the envelopes. Thick manila ones marked confidential, addressed not to me, but to her, Jessica Mason, care of Walter Mason. They came from medical offices I'd never visited, psychological services with names like Mind Path Renewal and Cognitive Clarity Institute. I intercepted one of them before she could retrieve it, slid it open in the bathroom, and found inside a stack of paperwork I barely understood. Clinical assessments, recommendations for guardian-led psychiatric evaluation, notes suggesting early signs of progressive memory decline consistent with age-related neurocognitive disorders. My name was on every page. The dates were recent. The signature was forged. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read them, the letters dancing across the paper like insects swarming around something already dead. She was building a legal framework, a false medical history, manufacturing the illusion of a man unraveling at the edges so she could step in as the savior, the caretaker, the responsible daughter who had no choice but to take control of her father's finances, his house, his prescriptions. It was happening faster than I'd feared, and with more cunning than I'd imagined her capable of. When I confronted her, paper in hand, voice trembling not with weakness, but rage, she didn't deny it. She didn't bother with tears or excuses. She simply looked at me, eyes flat and mouth set in a grim, tired line, and said, "You don't know what you're talking about, Dad. You're sick. You need help, and you won't ask for it. So I have to do something before it's too late." I asked her who had written the reports, and she said nothing. I asked if she had forged my signature, and she turned and walked away. That was all the confirmation I needed. The next day, I visited a doctor I trusted, one who had treated me for years and requested a full battery of cognitive tests. Memory, reasoning, attention, verbal comprehension, the whole gamut. I told him I wanted it documented, certified, and notarized if necessary. I wanted indisputable proof of my mental acuity because I knew now that Jessica's plan wasn't just about drugs or money. It was about erasure. She wanted to rewrite the narrative of my life in real time, to make me into the unreliable narrator of my own downfall. I wouldn't let her. While waiting for the test results, I installed 2 more cameras, one in the hallway outside my room, another in the living room disguised inside a potted plant. I also began making copies of my documents, birth certificate, social security card, will, life insurance policies, and storing them in a safety deposit box at a different bank. I transferred a portion of my funds to a new account, one she didn't know existed, and set up automatic payments to cover my utilities so she couldn't claim I'd forgotten to pay them. I told no one. I trusted no one. The entire process made me feel like a fugitive in my own home, like I was building a bunker not against strangers or thieves, but against blood. I hated it, but I kept going. The breaking point came 2 weeks later when I returned home from a routine doctor's visit and found the house eerily quiet. No music, no clatter from the kitchen, just silence. I called out, got no answer. I stepped into the living room and saw my desk drawer pried open, papers scattered across the floor. My safe, the one she didn't know about, was still locked, but someone had clearly tried to force it. On the table was a cup of tea, still warm. She had been there. I checked my camera feed and watched, heart pounding, as the playback showed Jessica pacing the room, rifling through my desk, holding pages up to the light, photographing them with her phone. She had gone straight to the drawer the moment I left. There was no hesitation, no pretense of cleaning or looking for something else. She knew exactly what she was after. That evening, she returned like nothing had happened. She brought takeout, said she felt bad we hadn't had a meal together in a while. I played along, forcing smiles, sipping the soup cautiously. I noticed she watched me eat, not with warmth but calculation. That night, I didn't sleep. My phone buzzed with a notification around 1:30 a.m., an alert from the security system. I checked the feed and saw her entering the living room again, barefoot, carrying a flashlight. She didn't know about the camera in the plant. She knelt beside the safe, trying different combinations. After 15 minutes, she gave up and left. I saved the footage, labeled it, backed it up in 3 places. The next morning, I made the call. Not to the police, not yet, but to a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse and medical fraud. I sent him the documents, the video, the audio clips, the forged letters. He called me back within an hour. "Mr. Mason," he said, "I've seen a lot of cases in my time, but this is calculated, premeditated. You have more than enough to press charges." I told him I wasn't sure I was ready. He didn't push. "Just know that the longer you wait, the more power she accumulates. This won't stop on its own." Days later, my test results arrived. The neurologist called me personally. "Mr. Mason, your results are excellent. No signs of cognitive decline. In fact, you scored above average for your age in several areas. Whatever concerns you had, I can assure you, you're mentally sharp and entirely competent to make your own decisions." I asked for it in writing. He emailed it within the hour. I printed 5 copies. That weekend, Jessica was out of the house more than usual. She didn't say where she was going. I didn't ask. But on Sunday, she came home with a new phone, a new handbag, and a smell of cologne on her that wasn't hers. She was talking quickly, nervously, about needing to move some things around in the guest room. I followed her in and saw that she'd rearranged the furniture, pushed the dresser against the wall, stripped the bed, removed the curtains. I asked what she was doing. She shrugged. "Might be having someone stay here for a while. A friend. Just until they get back on their feet." I told her no, that no one else would be living in this house. Her expression changed instantly. Flat eyes, clenched jaw. "It's not just your house," she snapped. "You're old, Dad. You need help, whether you admit it or not. I'm trying to build a support system for you, and all you do is fight me." I said nothing. She stormed off. The next morning, I found a legal document on the kitchen counter. It was a petition for guardianship. She had filed it in family court, claiming I was no longer capable of managing my affairs, citing the forged documents as evidence. The hearing date was set for the following month. I stood there, holding the paper, heart racing, and I realized this was no longer about protection. This was war. She was trying to strip me of my autonomy, to legally reduce me to a ward under her control. And she was doing it through lies, forged paperwork, and a campaign of psychological manipulation. She was trying to erase me. I called the lawyer, forwarded the notice, sent him everything I had. He filed an immediate objection, attaching the real test results, affidavits from my physician and neurologist, and a request for an independent psychiatric evaluation. He told me not to worry, that the case was weak, built on fabricated evidence and emotional manipulation. But I worried anyway. Because I knew Jessica. I knew she wouldn't stop unless she was forced to. And I knew that once someone like her tasted control, they didn't let go. They tightened their grip until the thing they held stopped breathing. That night, I made my decision. I would expose her. All of it. Not just to the court, but to the world if I had to. She had counted on my shame, my silence, my hope that somehow love would fix what had rotted between us. But love without accountability is just weakness in disguise. And I wasn't weak. Not anymore. Not this time. The morning of the court hearing, I woke before dawn. Not from anxiety, at least not the trembling kind that leaves you breathless, but from something deeper, colder, older, a sensation that reminded me of the early days of Caroline's illness, when every morning I woke wondering if this would be the day she would forget who I was. That kind of fear doesn't make you panic. It makes you deliberate. I shaved slowly, picked out the navy blazer I hadn't worn since her funeral, and sat for a long while by the window, listening to the wind shift through the trees outside. Jessica was already gone. She had left the house 2 hours earlier, dressed sharply, carrying a large black folder filled with what I could only assume were the documents she believed would win her the case. Evidence of my supposed deterioration. Proof of my frailty. Paper constructs designed to turn me into a man who couldn't be trusted to take his own pills or pay his own water bill. But I had something better than papers. I had truth. I had video. I had names, dates, time-stamped proof. I had a neurologist's certification of my clarity. I had no doubt she would lie on the stand. I had rehearsed it in my mind 100 times. The wounded daughter, trembling hands, eyes brimming with forced tears, voice cracking as she spoke of her concern for her poor, confused father. Alone and overwhelmed. Forgetting to eat, leaving the oven on, wandering into the street in his slippers. I knew she would have allies, perhaps that friend who'd been planning to move into the guest room, maybe even a therapist whose name I'd never heard before, but whose license number she'd somehow used. But I also knew the story she built was riddled with seams, and seams split when pulled. At the courthouse, my lawyer met me at the steps, handed me a folder, and nodded once without speaking. We had reviewed everything. He didn't need to remind me what was inside. Photos of the forged documents, the stills from the surveillance camera, screenshots of text messages she had sent to buyers, her voice on audio describing my medications as easy flips, her exact words. He doesn't even know what he's taking anymore. Caught with perfect clarity. I walked into that courtroom with a spine I hadn't felt in years. Jessica was already seated at the petitioner's table. She looked polished, her hair straightened, a conservative blazer over a gray blouse, her expression carefully arranged somewhere between concern and exhaustion. She glanced at me once, flat, unreadable, and then back to her stack of notes. The judge, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense tone, began the proceedings without ceremony. Jessica spoke first. She laid it all out as she had rehearsed, detailing my supposed decline, the moment she caught me repeating myself, the time I forgot where I lived, the doctors, who had warned her I was a danger to myself. She even brought up the time I fell in the backyard, neglecting to mention that it was due to the very pills she'd stolen. She described me as paranoid, accused me of hiding things from her, of refusing care. She played the dutiful daughter, the reluctant guardian forced to step in. Her voice cracked once, right on cue, and she reached for a tissue. The judge nodded, made notes, asked no questions. It was a performance, and she had practiced. Then it was our turn. My lawyer began with the medical records, not the ones Jessica submitted, but the verified ones, the official results from my neurologist and primary physician. He handed them to the judge, pointed out the discrepancies, highlighted the forged signatures, the clinic addresses that didn't exist. Then came the footage. The judge watched in silence as Jessica appeared on the screen, opening my medication cabinet, emptying pills into a plastic bag, resealing the bottle with practiced ease. Then another clip, her on the phone, laughing, calling my medicine pharmaceutical gold, bragging that I didn't suspect a thing. Her face remained still as the images played, but her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The final blow was the witness statement, the boy who had called me late that night, whose friend had nearly died. He couldn't attend in person, but his statement had been notarized. He admitted to buying pills from Jessica, confirmed they were labeled in my name. The judge read it in full. Then she looked at me and asked, "Mr. Mason, do you have anything you'd like to say?" I stood slowly, aware of how much weight rested in this moment. I looked at Jessica, not with hatred, but with something closer to mourning. And then I spoke. I told the court that I had trusted my daughter, that I had welcomed her into my home at the lowest point in her life, believing we could rebuild what had fractured over the years. I admitted to being naive, to ignoring early signs out of hope, out of love. I described the fear of not knowing if the pills I took each morning were real, the disorientation of feeling your body fail and wondering if someone you love is the cause. I told them about Caroline, how she had died before she could see what her daughter had become. I told them I had held on, not out of weakness, but because I had wanted to believe that redemption was possible. "But this," I said, holding up the evidence, "this is not concern. This is exploitation. This is not about care. It is about control. My daughter didn't try to help me. She tried to erase me. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just told the truth." The judge was silent for a long time after I finished. She looked down at the files before her, at the images, the dates, the recordings. Then she spoke, her voice firm. She dismissed the petition, declared me fully competent. Then, to my surprise, she added that the court would be referring the matter for criminal investigation. She said it calmly, as though reading from a script. But I saw the flash in Jessica's eyes, the panic, the sudden realization that the game was not only over, but had turned against her. She stood abruptly, began protesting, shouting about misinterpretations, about misunderstood intentions. The judge told her to sit down. She refused. Bailiffs approached. Jessica looked at me one last time, and in that moment I saw her fury break into something worse. Fear. And then she was escorted out. After the hearing, my lawyer and I walked to the parking lot in silence. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I didn't answer right away. What I wanted was something I couldn't name. Justice, maybe, or peace. Or just a morning where I didn't wake up wondering what fresh betrayal waited outside my bedroom door. I told him I'd think about it. That night the house was quiet again. But this time not in that haunted, waiting way. It was real silence. Undisturbed. Clean. I made myself a cup of tea and stood by the kitchen window, watching the lights from the neighbor's house flicker across the grass. The air smelled like rain. I reached into the drawer, unlocked it, took out the bottle of Coradrex, and held it in my hand. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to count the pills. I knew they were all there. It has been 4 months since the hearing, and the house is quieter now than it has ever been. Not just in sound, but in weight. The air feels lighter, the walls less watchful. For the first few weeks after Jessica left, I walked from room to room, as if expecting to find her still there, curled on the couch, or leaning over the kitchen sink, or pacing with that nervous energy she carried like static clinging to her skin. But she was gone, truly gone this time, and not just from the house. Her name has not crossed my mailbox since, No calls, no letters, no text messages. Only the silence of a child who has finally realized that the father she once counted on has turned into someone she can no longer manipulate. Someone who saw through the soft lies and the carefully arranged expressions. I think sometimes about whether she feels regret, whether she lies awake in whatever apartment she's found and remembers the look on my face that day in court when her stories crumbled. I doubt it. Or if she does, it doesn't last long. People like Jessica rarely sit with shame. They trade it in for anger, redirect it outward like heat bouncing off a scorched road. I don't know if she'll ever face the full consequence of what she did. Charges were filed, but the process moves slowly, and prosecutors have other priorities. They asked if I wanted to testify. I said I would if it came to that, but I wouldn't chase it. I told them the truth had already been said, in full, in the most public and irreversible way, and that if justice comes, let it be quiet, not for spectacle, but for closure. The most profound punishments aren't always issued in courtrooms. Sometimes they come in the form of loss that cannot be undone. Life has become smaller, but not in a way that feels tragic. There's something clean about solitude when you finally trust it. I wake when I want, not because I hear someone stomping down the hall or slamming the bathroom door. I take my medicine in peace, no longer counting out of fear, but out of habit. I've even planted tomatoes in the backyard again, something I haven't done since before Caroline passed. I talk to the plants sometimes, not because I believe they listen, but because it feels good to speak into something that grows. There's a kind of holiness in the earth that no betrayal can stain. I've begun going to the library again, once a week. I sit by the large window and read old history books, sometimes biology texts that remind me of who I used to be before I became the man with the sick daughter, or the confused old widower. I've started writing as well. Not memoirs, nothing dramatic, just pages of thoughts, observations, moments I want to hold on to. Some of them are about Caroline, the way she laughed in her sleep, or how she hummed while folding laundry. Some are about Jessica when she was young, when she still wore pigtails and thought I was the tallest, strongest man in the world. I don't write out of bitterness. I write because if I don't put those memories somewhere, they'll dissolve under the weight of everything that came after. And I don't want that. I don't want to forget that once, long ago, she was good. I've had to adjust to being viewed differently now. At the pharmacy, they call me Mr. Mason again, instead of Sweetie or Hun. The neighbors wave more respectfully. Even my doctor seems to regard me with a new kind of clarity, like he finally sees that I'm not just a name on a chart with thinning bones and a thinning memory, but a man who survived something most people wouldn't believe unless they saw it unfold, frame by frame. I know what elder abuse is now, not just in theory, but in texture, in scent, in the way it moves through a home like a fog you don't notice until you can't breathe. I've joined a support group online, a place for people who've lived through betrayal by family. Some stories are worse than mine. Some are quieter. All of them are the same in their core ache, the horror of discovering that love is not always protection, that blood is not always loyalty, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one who kisses you on the cheek and says, "Good night." I still keep the videos. The USB drive is stored in a safe, along with all the documentation. Not because I plan to use them again, but because I need to remember that this wasn't a nightmare. It happened. It was real. That kind of memory has weight, and like all heavy things, it has to be placed somewhere secure. I've updated my will. The house will go to a nonprofit that helps seniors fight financial abuse. I've made arrangements for my burial next to Caroline, in the same plot we picked when she was first diagnosed. I don't plan on dying soon, but I also don't pretend I'm invincible. Death no longer frightens me. I faced a much more terrifying thing and lived to tell the story. I faced my own child's betrayal and didn't let it kill me. There are evenings when I sit by the window with a cup of tea and feel something like peace. It doesn't come all at once. It seeps in slowly, the way light creeps back into the sky after a long storm. I don't expect happiness, not in the way young people do, but I've found a kind of steadiness, a rhythm that no longer includes fear. That, to me, is enough. The house is safe again. My mind is my own. And though I walk through these rooms alone, I no longer feel like I'm fading. I am here. I endured. I remember everything.